Morning, everybody. How we doing? It's Thursday, June 3rd, I believe. It's been quite the year so far. I know that everybody appreciates my political commentary, and I get that. This is going to be a music channel first and foremost. But please remember, I know a lot of these people in Minneapolis. I've been friends with them for 15, 20 years. It breaks my heart to see what's happening, how they're being misrepresented. The Antifa, the Boogie Boys, the Kit Klan, all these people in there are trying to discredit the movement. It's really disheartening for me. And underlying all of it is a lack of understanding. Ignorance is our biggest enemy, always has been, always will be. And something I used to share when I was driving a lot of Uber and Lyft back a couple years ago when I wasn't DJing much was this country's divide is so polarized. It's so regimented into two camps. And it's by design on a lot of levels. And one of the things that divides us is our exposure to other groups. And I came up with this analogy and I shared it a lot, got a lot of positive feedback. So I'm going to share with you guys real quick here. Life is like a giant puzzle. And it's bigger than this, but I'm going to reduce it to a 10,000 piece puzzle. So it's 10,000 pieces that make up some grasp of understanding of purpose and meaning in life. And you're born with 200 pieces. 200. That doesn't give you a lot of information. And those 200 pieces, you go into school and you collect a couple hundred more pieces. So all of a sudden you're at 300-400 pieces now. And you talk to some of your neighbors and you get to maybe 400 or 500 pieces out of a 10,000 piece puzzle. And this is where the difference happens in America. The divide is very much rural and suburban versus urban. And in the rural and the suburban communities, there's a lot of isolation to other groups. And there's still a lot of prejudice when other groups try to move in. Eden Prairie, Minnesota has a large Indian population from Asia. And there's a lot of resentment about how they've taken over large chunks of Eden Prairie. But to get back to my story, you have your 200 pieces, your parents give you some, the community you live in gives you some. You're 18, 19, 20 years old, you have 400 pieces of a 10,000 piece puzzle. So you have a few chunks of this corner, you have an idea what it might be. That could be a boat, maybe a barn, I'm not sure. That's probably sky up there, but I'm not really sure what the rest of the puzzle is. And in a small rural community, those few assumptions you make on what the puzzle is consistently get confirmed by the viewpoints of all of your community. You ask your neighbors, and he has the exact same puzzle pieces you got. And so you come to a consensus like, yeah, that's probably a boat. And then you ask the guy down the block, and he tells you, yeah, you guys are probably right, that's probably a boat. Suddenly three of you agree that it's a boat, and you become more convinced more than ever that it's a boat. And then you ask your pastor, and you ask some of the other people in your community, and there's this consensus, unanimous, that builds, and they become confident, even with limited information. But because of consensus, they're like, yeah, that's got to be a boat, and that's probably the sky. So the picture must be of that. Must be of water. And that's the meaning. That's the definition. We got it. And it leads to an echo chamber and people with limited information becoming extremely confident in their viewpoints. And that's very troubling. Conversely, in the urban environment in America, you have large pockets of African Americans, large pockets of Native people still, large populations of Caribbean immigrants, Vietnamese. We have a huge Somali population here. There's a big Chinese population here, Vietnamese, a large Hmong, Cambodian, Laotian population, quite a few Tibetans, all the different European groups that you can think of, Middle Eastern. And so all these groups intermingle. And now you're even a Caucasian inner city American, you work with Muslims, you work with Chinese, you work with the gay community, you interact with the blacks. And it gains you a knowledge and an understanding, and that understanding leads to an empathy. And you can grasp their situation and also know sometimes better than when they're being demonized in the media. Because you have first-hand experience, and that understanding makes you not afraid. Also, in the urban environment, as you interact with all these other groups, you're adding puzzle pieces to your picture. And so suddenly that same base that you have, that the rural community also has, that same 400 or 500 pieces living in America, you suddenly are adding some Pakistani puzzle pieces, some Saudi puzzle pieces, some Israeli Chinese, you name it. You're adding puzzle pieces to the overall picture. And it's broadening your perspective of what the image is, and it's actually making you less sure. And because the urban community has so many different places and sources of input of information, there's less consensus actually on what the overall image must be. Because these guys got a large Chinese influx in their opinion. Over here across town, there's a large Indian, Pakistani area, and that influenced their puzzle pieces. And so in the urban environment, there's less consensus because it's not what I originally thought it was. It can't just be a boat. And this information here leads me to think it could be that. And the point is, no one in life collects the entire puzzle. But you should never stop collecting puzzle pieces. That's kind of the key here. Keep collecting those puzzle pieces. Keep collecting that information. The more information you glean, the better hope you have of making the right choices when it comes to purpose and meaning in life. My God, how can you settle with the pieces that you're born with and the pieces that your parents instill in you, and then just watch TV and gather the pieces that you're told to believe in? It's absolutely part of the divide in this country. So by all means, people, collect puzzle pieces. Add as much information to the puzzle as you can before you make your mind up. And ideally, you won't make your mind up. Ideally, you'll stay flexible and malleable enough that when new information arises, it can alter your opinion of what the puzzle probably is. But when you become sure of what the puzzle is, especially with so much less information and pieces than a lot of others, that's a real problem. And so in America, that's what we have. We have a group that's very isolated, and it's well over half the nation, and spatially wise, it's 2/3 of the nation, because it's a lot of the urban, sprawling communities. But their lack of exposure to other communities makes them ignorant and makes them afraid. And they don't add puzzle pieces. They don't grow. And because they get so wrapped up in the consensus of their community, they become as militant and as charged with their beliefs, and oftentimes more confident in what they believe than the people who come from an urban environment with twice as many puzzle pieces, that actually those pieces make them less sure of the meaning, because it shattered a lot of their initial definitions of what the puzzle must be. So collect puzzle pieces, people. Add as much information as you can before you come up to any form of belief system. And certainly don't conform to a consensus just because everybody else around me thinks that it's so. That's how you end up hailing Hitler and marching off into destruction, doomsday, and it's not a good recipe. Individual thought, seek truth, seek understanding, collect pieces. Try to understand the entire global community that you live in, because you're human after all. When you limit your scope to my own community, my own neighborhood, and the few puzzle pieces that I inherit from that, your scope is so limited, but your fervent belief can be so strong because everybody else is so in lockstep with you. I can't be wrong. They all think the same thing. Moving on. Today I want to talk about what I initially wanted to call the Last Supper of jazz. If there was a Last Supper, who would be at that table? Who would be at the head of the table? Who would the 12 disciples be? And who would the two women on either side of the leader of the group be? That leaves you 15 people. And as I did it, I realized there's a couple other parallels here as well. With all the great nicknames in jazz, a lot of these guys could almost be mobsters with names like Bean. And so I'm going to kind of give you multiple angles on this. And they also feel like they could be a group of special agents. Pops, Bird, Monk. It's a special forces team. They're all got code names. And in some ways, it is all of that. They are special agents. They are mobsters and gangsters in the eye of a lot. They're fighting for their own freedom, identity, and economics. And they are, in a lot of ways, prophets of a new, I don't want to say Messiah, but of a new spirituality, a new recognition. And the disciples that follow this new leader are all incredibly important people in the canon. And as a beginner, and I'm talking to mostly the beginners here, people, these 15 artists are people that you should have in your collection. Number one, first and foremost, and he's at the head of the table, is Pops. Satchmo. He's sitting right at the head of that table in the middle of the Last Supper. And he has done more for the black community in America than all the great athletes, Jackie Robinson, Michael Jordan combined. A lot of the people who criticized him as being Uncle Tom in the 60s and the 70s never opened a fraction of the doors that this man opened. He is greatness personified, and part of why he is at the head of the table is because he is the great forgiveness. And almost every other jazz player borrows from that language. Forgiveness is the path forward. Forgiveness, dropping the grudge and moving on and letting myself heal. When you forgive, you don't let somebody else off the hook. You let yourself off the hook. You allow yourself to live and breathe. Carrying hate and resentment and anger is an exhausting, tolling walk in life. And Armstrong said, you know what? I can't change the past. I can only change the present so much. But I bet you I can have a big impact on the future. Let me just pick up this trumpet. Hold on, let me wipe the sweat off my brow here. Play this trumpet, and I'm going to snap some chains with this. You better believe it. And I might smile, and I might shuck and dance, and I might put on my leopard print suit for your movie. But I'm going to come into your homes, white America, and I'm going to make you and your sons and your daughters comfortable with me and my skin. That's leadership. That's messianic. He is the great ambassador. Thus, he's at the head of the table. An ambassador is what he is. And if you have 3-4 Armstrong records, I'm going to give you a few to start with. This Oscar Peterson record on Verve is a fantastic place. It's kind of getting up there in price now, the $30-$40 range. It's worth having. Oscar's wonderful behind him, kind of laying down. I think Ray Brown's on this as well. It's just gorgeous. It's a must-have. Every collection should have that. And then with Armstrong, what you really want to do is try to get something from different eras. In the 60s and 70s, stuff like Hello Dolly and What a Wonderful World, he's singing more, in part because of health issues. He can't play the trumpet quite like he used to be able to for health reasons. His lips would burst open. He had heart issues. And so he wasn't just singing pop songs because he wanted to sell out. He's the great ambassador. He was doing what he could do to still bring peace and harmony. He represented America on a lot of tours around the world. In a nation that didn't really accept him, he was still representing this nation. That's a great American. Armstrong is the rock. But you want to have some stuff from the 40s. You want to have some stuff from the 20s. Stuff with Earl Father Hines, stuff with Sidney Bechet. You want hot 5s and hot 7s if you can find it. The hot 5s and the hot 7 stuff, it cooks. And if you want to really hear the playing virtuosity of Mr. Armstrong and how all the great players that come after Armstrong owe him and are indebted to him.
When we played the Sunset Cafe in Chicago,
got that big bright tone. Plays with a lot of fire. The hot fives, hot sevens stuff. It's in multiple formats. Reach for it if you get the chance. It's absolutely must-have material, and it absolutely will make a big impact on the listener. He's just a giant in every aspect of it. He's at the head of the table. Another great section by him. This is with some Father Hines stuff. If you listen to West End Blues, you'll hear him shred and dissect all the institutions of the European tradition. He tears rhythm apart. He tears melody apart. He tears and dissects all the frameworks of how we use time signatures and switches up as he's going through his improvisation on that great break in West End Blues. There's people out there like Gary Giddens who can describe it better than I can, but Armstrong is the foundation. Moving on. Secondly, at the right hand of the great Armstrong is the great Duke Ellington. And Ellington is such an important part of jazz history. Every jazz collection should have Duke. The Duke is the compositional mastermind. If this was a group of mafioso, Duke is the one coming up with the game plans. He's illustrating and drawing out how the heist is going to go down. And he needs sweeping movements. He needs counter movements. He needs there to be distractions and flurries of action. He needs his special agents to show up and show what each of their skill sets can be. And so at the right hand of Armstrong at the table is Duke Ellington. And so you got Pops and you got the Duke. And the Duke is the general. He's laying out game plans. And he sees in his troops their skill sets and what they can do, what they should do better, and what they can do better than they realize they can do. That's leadership. That's general stuff. And so the Duke is such an important part of jazz history. And again, it's such a huge body of work with Ellington. They say 2,500 songs the guy composed. And you really can't go wrong. His late 30s, early 40s stuff is legendary. It's available in numerous different ways from Smithsonian. Columbia reissues a lot of it. The stuff he records with his group in the 50s at Columbia, a lot of that stuff's outstanding. You can go back to the 20s to the jungle music stuff, and there's some incredible stuff there with Cat Anderson and the great members of his group in those days. Again, he's an ambassador. He's debonair. He's suave and sophisticated. He needs to be in every collection. So as a beginner, go find yourself some Armstrong, but then let's get some Duke. And Duke has such an air about him. And it's tough to know where to start again with a guy like Duke, but Ellington Newport, it's not that tough a record to find. And the 10-inch stuff you find is always going to be great. I recommend this Greatest Hits on Columbia. It's got a lot of his classics on it, great versions of them. Satin Doll don't get around much anymore. I'm beginning to see the light. C-Jam Blues, Prelude to a Kiss, Solitude, Take the A-Train. It's high level. It's very high level stuff. So keep your eye open for Ellington. The next guy at the table on the left hand of Armstrong is the great Count Basie. And he's who teaches my children to swing. He's who puts the troops through their marching orders. He's the one out there that's teaching these guys about how to march in step, how to be locked in groove, how to find the ultimate rhythm. And he's about space and minimalism. And we're going to drive forward into the enemy lines. And so while the Duke is the general, the Count is your field marshal. He's out there and he's organizing. And he's producing what some of these troops think they got to do. He's like, nah, let's work in concert together. Because we got artillery back here. We got cavalry over here. So you don't got to do as much as you think, infantry. You don't got to do as much as you think. Cannon fire, do your part. Because if we all do our part, watch it all come together. And in the history of jazz, nobody swings like Count Basie. He's the architect of so much of the music. And ultimately, his piano playing is very underappreciated and underrated. And he's the guy who influences so many of the greats. From guys like Bill Evans, it's just, the list is endless, honestly. Monk's minimalism, his reduction of the notes. Basie plays, and sometimes your ears actually will fill in the notes he's not playing. And he'll take a triad out, he'll take a third or a fifth out. He's so subconsciously minimal and reducing the amount of effort and energy we have to expend to get my message across. If you're going to collect Count Basie, and honestly for my money, you can't really have a jazz collection and not have Duke and Count. This Atomic Mr. Basie on Roulette record is absolutely a must-have. This is an early Norman Granz on clef, 10-inch, great little find, worth looking for. You need to have some of his early stuff. Columbia reissues a lot of it, stuff like 1 O'Clock Jump, one of his standards, you know, that he would play in almost all of his sets. Jumping Up the Woodside. So you need to have his 20s and 30s era covered. But really it's his roulette years, going into the Verve off and on, and then Pablo, he goes later. He has a band at that point that's just all-star members entirely. And what's great about all these people I'm going to talk to is once you have these 15 artists, they all have their own universes around them that will introduce you to the next tier. Basie's groups, Ellington's groups, Armstrong's kin, other people we're going to talk about coming up. They will all inform you about that next group of musicians. And so the members of Basie's group are absolutely critical and record everywhere in the 50s and 60s. You can't go wrong with Basie. This Verve record, April in Paris, is absolutely fantastic. So now, who are the women? Who is the Mother Virgin Mary, and who's Mary Magdalene? And the Virgin Mary, for me, pretty much has to be the great Ella Fitzgerald. She's the lady of song. She is a virtuoso in her own right. She can scat and do bebop like nobody's business. She sings with such an effortlessness. She redefines the songbook all the time. She is an ambassador in the sense that we can send her in as an envoy, and she'll represent us with class and dignity and wear the opera gloves, and she'll just be a wonderful, sophisticated representation of the court. So Lady of Song, Ella Fitzgerald, is such an important part of jazz history, and she's right there at the table. And the great place to start with Ella Fitzgerald is the great songbooks that she does for the Verve label. This is the Rodgers and Hart songbook, and these records go between ballads and some incredible swinging. And believe me when I say, there's some royalty playing on these records. Norman Granz has almost all the greats in the swing era, as I've talked to you before. This is the Cole Porter songbook. Another great, these are twofers, by the way, that came out in the 50s. This is the Irving Berlin songbook. Beautiful gatefold records. And this is the Ellington songbook. And there's a couple more as well I didn't bust out. I didn't want to bust out every record I had with these artists. We'd be here all day. But when you collect Ella, Look for the songbooks. Look for anything she does on Verve. She ends up on Pablo again later. She's so important to Norman Granz. That's why she kind of starts the Verve label, and she gives her own sequence, the 4000 sequence. That's 4001, that's 4010, and that's 4019, and everything for the most part in the 4000 sequence is Ella Fitzgerald stuff. There's a 2000 sequence that's kind of more pop stuff and other vocal artists, Anita O'Day and stuff like that. There's a 5000 sequence that's really kind of schmaltzy, and there's the 8000 sequence, which is the jazz. And the 8000 sequence is especially the early stuff, is outstanding, you know. But the 4000 sequence, it's Ella. That's who she is. She's that giant, and so she is the Virgin Mary. And now, who is the fantastic trebled Mary Magdalene? Who is the one that, if we need some dirty work done, some wet work, some counter-espionage, some spy work done, Lady Day, Billie Holiday. She's at the other hand next to Duke. So you got Armstrong, Duke and Count, Lady Day and Lady Song. And so far we have a pretty good courtship building, don't we? We got a nice little family of mafiosos. It's just jazz royalty. Billie comes from a troubled life, and her limited vocal range is completely masked and made irrelevant by her ability to emote a song and to express it from her heart and her soul. And every song she does, that song is thankful that she did it, and in some ways she becomes the reference point on what that song potentially can sound and look like. So she's not sitting around writing in a sentimental mood in body and soul. She's reinterpreting them and making them her own, and redefining the content and the message, and the agony and the pain and the sorrow makes her a valuable person to have at the table. Because her and her girls, they can run you some game and get you some people caught up. You got a nice little brothel of girls, blackmail's gonna happen. Again, it's just such a powerful gal. You need to have Billie and Ella in your collection. There's a lot of great stuff by Billie out there. Stuff on Verve, Solitude, Lady Sings the Blues is just gorgeous. Her stuff on Decca, she's got stuff on Columbia from the 40s that's out on LP. This is on the MGM label, and ends up buying Verve not long after this and changing the direction of Verve. This is her last recording with the Ray Ellis Orchestra, and she's weak, she's frail, but she still has a power to the gospel that she's preaching, you know. And so those are your two ladies at the Last Supper table. Now we're going to move on now, and we're going to look at our field commanders. And first and foremost here, a guy you can't really go wrong with is Charlie Parker. Bird, Special Agent Bird. And you people who are young and think jazz is all about Miles Davis and Sun Ra and digging out obscure free jazz that was never really part of the community or the canon, Parker is where you should be going. Again, the guys around him, from Dizzy Gillespie to Max Roach, he's just Curly Russell. He's a super influential guy. Kenny Clark. There's just a whole group around him that becomes that next infantry division. And those that followed Bird were devout followers. And so when you build your jazz collection, you need to get some Parker. And again, it's a huge body of work. So you need to look for old Savoy recordings. Young Miles Davis is on a lot of them. Dizzy's on some of them. There's a lot of great players that show up. Red Rodney's on trumpet on some of these tracks. Max Roach plays them off and on. Tommy Potter. Just some of the great players, Bud Powell, Tiny Grimes, John Lewis is on a couple tracks. Parker's such an important part of the jazz history, and I feel like kids today don't collect Parker like they should. This is on the Verve label, Bird and Diz, and they don't record together as often as you think they would, sadly. Parker's the guy, if you're gonna listen to anybody play with strings, it's Parker. Parker can yank melody and emotion out of any setting. And it's just the context of his life. I've showed you this one in our episode I did recently on Young Miles. Parker on Savoy, early Verve stuff. A lot of the Verve stuff's going to be the early 50s. The Savoy stuff, the Dial stuff's going to be more the late mid 40s. But he's redefining the music and how we go into battle constantly. And he's such an important chapter and literally changes the approach of everyone in the game. And he needs to be recognized by the young kids today. The young kids today are so caught up in the fringes of jazz and digging into 70s and 80s jazz and even the modern jazz cats today. If you got 20 records of new jazz players, but you don't have any Charlie Parker, you have no context. You don't have a foundation to your castle, and the first wave is going to wash that shit away. The next guy you gotta have, and there's definitely a side chronology to what I'm doing here. The next guy you gotta have is Monk. And Monk, we kind of see him as an eccentric. On some level, he's a bit of an eccentric as a personality, but he is a composer. He's as interesting in a solo setting as he is in a big band. In fact, I'd say he's more interesting in a trio or a solo setting. He's got some of the chops of the old stride players and the virtuosity of a Tatum at times, but he's also taken what Parker does and then eliminated some of the steps in the ladder, and he's just finding the intricate intervals that are appealing to his ear. And it's like he's almost sitting there thinking, feeling, emoting all at the same time. He's like, no, I don't want that note. I'm going to plunk that there. And he's just such a compelling player, and all the avant-garde, all of it, stems from Thelonious Monk. He is that new Special Forces group. Special agent, you need to have yourself Thelonious Monk. Brilliant Corners should be in every collection. You should have one or two of his Columbia records. His early Blue Note stuff's great. His Riverside stuff's really where it's at. This is him by himself. The record he does of Ellington songs with Oscar Pettiford and I believe Kenny Clark. That's an outstanding, beautiful record. His Monk stuff's great. His Blue Note stuff's great. His Prestige 3 records with Rollins are great. The Riverside stuff is outstanding, and it goes through so many permutations what he does at Riverside. There's just a lot of range to what Monk does, and so many of his songs have become staples of the jazz canon. You gotta have Monk in your collection. And those records I showed you are great places to start with Monk. So dig out some Monk. Next, Sergeant at Arms here is the wonderful originator of the tenor saxophone, Coleman Hawkins. And Coleman Hawkins, the Hawk, also known as the Bean, he's the commander of your Air Force. Hawk flies high. And you need a special agent by the name of Hawk, don't you? He's going to get you some information. He's going to put eyes on the ground. And you know what a Hawk misses? Nothing. A Hawk can see everything. And Coleman takes the tenor saxophone and takes it from a marching instrument with little place in jazz to making it the instrument in jazz. And for most people who aren't too immersed into jazz, a saxophone and jazz are synonymous. And in classical music, a saxophone is a very limited instrument, honestly. Trumpets and brass and the woodwinds, all that stuff is very prominent in classical. Saxophones have a much less prominent role, especially in classical. It's a bit of a double entendre there. But Coleman's so important. And again, you young kids, you need to have Coleman Hawkins in your collection. He's the one who took that instrument and made it fly. And where you start with Coleman Hawkins, he goes back to Fletcher Henderson in the late 20s. You know, so he's been around forever. I think he played with Basie a little bit, but you really want to focus on his small group recordings from the 50s. They're mostly on Prestige. This is the one with Red Garland. Anything on Moodsville or Swingsville Prestige with Coleman Hawkins is fantastic. Fantastic. This is Hawkeyes, another great Prestige session. This is Soul, Coleman Hawkins Soul. Again, these are all in quartet and quintet settings. Kenny Burrell, Ray Bryant, Wendell Marshall, and Ozzie Johnson. Then this is a Riverside session he does. J.J. Johnson, Idris Suleiman, Hank Jones, 1957. So if you got anything from the mid-50s by Coleman Hawkins, you will not regret it. It's beautiful. It's honestly the jazz that a lot of people search for but don't know where to find it. He is this. It's a nice, solid, but light swing. There's a delicacy to it. The filaments are there. It's not going to beat you over the head. It's going to softly swing you into bed. It's beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. That sounds like Kenny Burrell again. It is Kenny Burrell with Ron Albright on the piano, who I'm not familiar with, Ron Carter, and Andrew Cyril on the drums. This is actually a sampled copy of this. So that's a first pressing, probably 1957, 58. Coleman Hawkins is such an important institution and should be in every collection. Everybody who thinks they love jazz needs to have Coleman Hawkins. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it. Now, we all need that guy who's gonna wahoo and run his ass out into the battlefield and take names. And we all need that guy who can handle the rapid fire of the Tommy gun or the Gatling gun. There's a new technology now, and this war can be propulsed at such a dangerous level. And sitting at the table, Clifford Brown. You don't have jazz if you don't have Clifford Brown. You don't know what virtuosity is until you have Clifford Brown. You don't understand what the instrument of the trumpet should sound like until you sat with Clifford Brown for a couple of days. It's a hand grenade in his hands. Special Agent Brownie, you better believe Cold War Brown is going to give you some trouble. You need to have Clifford Brown in your collection. He'll define for you what rhythm, melody, and virtuosity at tempo sounds and looks like. Nobody plays with the clarity, the fire, the full extended force to complete long lyrical lines. He can come to the end of an 8-bar phrase and still have gas left in the tank. That Sopwith Camel could swoop down on the battlefield, laying down fire, covering all of his troops. And when he swoops back up, he's still laying bullets out. He's got time. He's so effortless. He's so under control. And fire under control inspires the troops. When you can do things at full speed and never lose control of your elements, your troops want to be like you. They have faith in you. And Clifford Brown, anything on Emerson, the stuff with Harold Land. It's all fantastic. Sonny Rollins shows up later on a couple of these recordings. But anything on the Emerson label with Clifford Brown and Max Roach on it, it's just the bridge that takes us from bebop into hard bop. It's such a fantastic expression. He's just such a leader. So now we're going to dive into another guy who takes from Coleman Hawkins and is even almost a protege of Coleman Hawkins. And he adds a lyricism and a storytelling to his playing that while Bean has some of that, Dex is that link to the modern player. And Dexter played bebop, Dexter plays hard bop, but Dexter plays modern cool. And Dexter is so, and he had a drug habit, he disappears off the scene at times, which makes his recording output sporadic and tough to grasp. And he's recording in the 40s with a lot of the great bebop giants. He's on the West Coast with Wardell Gray, playing on the LA scene on Central Avenue. Dexter's so important. This is a great recording on the Dutone label with Carl Perkins on it. Absolutely outstanding. One of the great jazz album covers of all time too, without any mistake about it. But Dexter Gordon, you want that early one, but then you want to look at his Blue Note output. And whether it's Getting Around, Dexter Gordon Go, A Swingin' Affair, One Flight Up, anything he does, Our Man in Paris, everything he does on the Blue Note label, 62 through 65 or so, is absolutely gorgeous. He's one of the great players of the ballad. He can seduce his enemy to sleep. He can weave such a wonderful narrative. And part of his gift is carrying the mythology of the music past in front of him and connecting it to what's all behind him. Dexter's a very mythological player in that sense. Now, the next guy is a landmine. He's sitting at the table. He's a founding father. And this guy is one of those boots on the ground type of guys. And of course, we're talking about the great Art Blakey. Buhena. He's the progenitor of hard bop, and he single-handedly puts the groove of hard bop into bebop. They start restating choruses and the themes of songs so people know exactly what song chord progressions we're working on. Parker just abandoned that. Parker's never going to abandon the melody, the phrasing. We're not going to state the theme. I'm just going to go on those chords, dissect them, and play. Hard bop reintroduces that aspect, brings the statement theme of the song back, and then they go. And you did not play in Blakey's groups unless you had some thunder, some fire, some genuine integrity. There's such a proving you by fire if you became a jazz messenger. And all the guys I'm showing you have this universe of players around them that will introduce you to the next level. Lee Morgan, Benny Golson, Hank Mobley, Jackie McLean, Donald Byrd. The list of guys who played with Blakey is much of the jazz royalty of today's collector. And so if you're a newbie and you're looking for a guy that's really going to help you understand what hard bop looks and sounds like, don't be fooled by those Gil Evans, Miles Davis records. This is what hard bop sounds like. And for Blakey, his two early Columbia records are both stalwarts and brilliant hard bop with a great group. And then he moves around a lot in 57, but then by 58, he's at Blue Note for a long time. Clifford Brown's on this with Lou Donaldson. His groups, Wayne Shorter, Curtis Fuller, Bobby Timmons, Jamie Merritt. The guys who go through these bands are all field generals in their own way. And that's part of what the legacy of Blakey was, is once I've got you in your boots in shape, I'm gonna kick you out of here and you're gonna start your own infantry division. And you're gonna be your own little paramilitary force, and you're gonna recruit your own GIs, and you're gonna be your own little army. And then those guys had their own decades of playing and starting musicians off. So Blakey is such an important piece of the jazz history, and he's a guy you need to have. If you don't have our Blakey in your collection, go get some. He's one of the founding fathers. Now we're kind of marching into the modern era here, and modern era in jazz means the 50s. When someone says this is modern jazz, it doesn't mean this is contemporary with today. It means this was the modern era of jazz and its last chapter of being in popular music. Miles Davis is that sleek envoy. A guy that was referenced with one name, Miles. Code word, Miles. Special Agent Miles. And he was a acerbic person. Y'all, beginners alike, are gonna know Miles. But he brings a certain style and a certain element of political smugness. And you may not always like the negotiations I try to negotiate, but you're still gonna have to negotiate with me, because I'm Miles, and I'm here as a special envoy. I'm gonna borrow your girlfriend later tonight, and don't touch my suit. This is a special suit. It's a special suit of armor. Miles had an elitism, an aloofness, a recognition of a new arrival of a black male. And he was critical at times of Armstrong's smiling and putting on for the white man. But again, Armstrong opens the doors for all these guys, including Miles. And Miles will be the first to admit that. And so even though I've read a few things critical of Miles speaking about Armstrong, he has far more positive praise for Armstrong than he does of criticism. But you want Miles in your collection, and I'm sure most all of you have Miles in your collection. If you don't, if you're just starting out, you want to have something from Prestige, Cook and Work and Sleep and Relax, and any of those four are totally worthwhile. You want to have one of the Gil Evans records. This one, or Sketches of Spain, is a great place to go. These are going to add strings and arrange sections on top of Miles, and are going to be a little bit more digestible to non-hardcore jazz fans. You want to have Kind of Blue. It's just one of the greatest records ever made. The band's incredible with Wynton Kelly, Bill Evans, Cannonball Adderley, Paul Chambers, and of course John Coltrane. And Kind of Blue is a timeless piece of music. It should be in every collection. Someday My Prince Will Come is the follow-up to Kind of Blue. The same band, except for Mobley is in the lead tenor chair, but Coltrane does appear on a couple tracks. And then you want something from the second quintet, and ESP is a great place to start. So Miles really from 55, 54 to about 64, 65. That's where you want to focus on your Miles initially. And there's a lot of great stuff in that era. There's a lot of great sidemen. And the Miles Davis universe is where most people start. And that's what gets people into Coltrane. That's what gets people into all the great people, Bill Evans, that play with Miles. So we're kind of getting near the end here. We've only got 3 artists left to go. And the next guy I want to show you is Sonny Rollins. Nuke. Special Agent Nuke. And Nuke's definitely at the table. Nuke was a huge leader. He was contemporaneous with Miles. And he plays with both Monk and Miles in the early 50s. And that alone makes him incredibly significant. He's got a large body of work, as a lot of these guys do. I think you want to focus on getting some of his classics like The Bridge on RCA from like 62. Saxophone Colossus from 55, 56 is absolutely one of the great jazz records of all time. His Blue Note output is really solid pieces, great groups, Nuke's Time, and then his Riverside Freedom Suite anything by Rollins really from 54 through 62, 63, you can't go wrong with it. He's a great, beautiful player, a big, full colored tone. He's got a bridge back to Dexter Gordon, back to Coleman Hawkins, and he plays straighter and sweeter than Coltrane. Him and Coltrane do have a rivalry, as it were, and they really end up taking much different trajectories. And Coltrane does giant steps, and it forces Rollins on a sabbatical, and Rollins comes back with the full beauty of records like The Bridge. And he plays from a different place. He often doesn't have piano on his records. You know, he's usually in a quartet setting or a trio setting, giving him lots of room to express. And when Rollins is great, there's few are better. And he's a great guy that's going to keep you in the middle of the road so you know exactly where the road is when your cart and your infantry are coming down that road. Special Agent Nuke is a special guy, and he's definitely at the Last Supper of jazz, as it were. Moving on, the guy we just referenced, John Coltrane, is also one of the true giants of this music. This is the aforementioned Giant Steps on 58 on Columbia. And the track Giant Steps is pretty renowned. He's got that recognizable tone, John Coltrane. And just lightning tempos. He starts to dissect some of the battle plans. He starts to break down the elements of the music and the standard approaches that the music had. He's probably the first guy since Parker to really challenge the numbers of the music, but he never loses feeling or his expression or his soulfulness, and he's got a huge body of work, which makes him one of the toughest guys to know where to start collecting. You want to have a couple of his Atlantic records. His early Prestige work is really solid. The Blue Note Blue Train record is legendary. My favorite things in Giant Steps on Atlantic are really, really great places to start. And then for his Impulse stuff, you might as well start with his first record. And of course, the great quartet follows this. And the Coltrane Quartet, that's a group, that's one of the great groups in jazz, and that's a special ops group. Those guys are off doing dangerous things. But Train, Special Agent Train, is a very important piece of the jazz puzzle. And then the last guy I want to show you, and this guy was for me the toughest guy to put at the table. To me, the other 14 people were fairly obvious, and I had no debate or doubts about any of them. The two girls, Ella and Billy, were no-brainers. Armstrong being the head of the table, Count Duke being the left and right-hand man. And then all the other guys were such innovators and giants of this music that there was no question in my mind that they were a part of every chapter and influenced everybody who's played. Once I got past those first 14, number 15 was tough for me. And there was so many guys that I could have slotted in this position. And I went with Freddie Hubbard. And I went with Freddie Hubbard because his virtuosity, it's Clifford Brown-like. And he's got a fire that he spits that's just beautiful. And he's a young man here. And he's the guy that takes jazz into the 70s without compromising what jazz is. And his Blue Note output is fantastic. And everything on Blue Note, a dozen titles, is worthwhile having. He has a couple of titles on Impulse that are definitely worth seeking out from 61, 62. And then this Red Clay record from 1970 on the CTI print brings jazz into the 70s. And to me, it's one of the great records of that moment. And I prefer it over a lot of the other things happening in jazz at that time. Hubbard is such a ball of fire. hubcap's a man that's dangerous, and you want him on your side. And to me, there's few guys in jazz that embody virtuosity under control like Freddie Hubbard does. He's just a real succinct player, and I don't think he overplays. I've had someone told me that he overplays. I don't think he does at all. I think he's expressing with a great joyfulness, and it never feels forced. It never feels on the edges of balance. It feels like it's always centered and firmly attached to the mag rail. And even though that train's going 200 miles an hour across that plateau, there's no risk of crash because Hubbard's at the wheel. He's steering the good ship. And you can have faith in Freddie Hubbard. So for me, that's my founding fathers of jazz, the people who are sitting at the Last Supper of jazz, the special agents of jazz, the mobsters of jazz. These are the most wanted FBI. These are the guys who could not be silenced. And time has chosen every one of these guys to be a luminary, leading figure of this music. So to all you beginners out there, dig into these 15 artists. If you want to understand jazz from its heart and its soul, where it's coming from, you can't go wrong with any of these 15 artists. Any of the records I showed you by them would be great places to start. And you need to have something by every one of these artists in your collection. And it's only then that you can start to place the rest of the jazz canon in its proper place. Know these progenitors, know these originators, these innovators, these inspirators. These are all brilliant men and women who changed the face of America and led the black community out of bondage into the future. I'm going to leave you with that. I hope you all dig that. Y'all be safe. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.